Okay. Yeah, also welcome from me and thank you for coming to the session. First of all, I have not to declare any conflict of interest, so I'm going to start with my presentation. So today I'm going to take you a little bit through the work that I and we, as I will talk about who we is in a second, across the last years. And the topic is mental health in academia. And I'm going to provide a status quo and practical implications for early career researchers' well-being. Maybe just for me to know, who amongst you are PhD candidates? Maybe raise your hand so I can see. Okay. So some postdocs probably also? Yes, okay, good. Okay, so we have quite some early career researchers here, some master students too? Yes, welcome to the master students as well. Okay, so I'm gonna get into a topic that you probably already know, and I just want to emphasize on why this is so important to talk about it. And I'm starting here with a survey from Nature from 2019, where 6,000 graduate students were asked about their doctoral researchers and how they're doing there. And actually 36% of the respondents claimed that they have sought some kind of help for anxiety or depression, which were caused by their PhD studies. And 1/3 of them sought help from places that were not within their institution. And even 18% said that they didn't feel supported by their institution in this matter. Another survey here from Evans in 2018 framed it as the mental health crises in graduate education. And here they actually asked roughly 2,000 students and PhD graduates or PhD candidates over 26 countries and different institutions. And they also found that there was a high rate of anxiety and depression within the samples, especially high when they felt like they were in unhealthy work environments. So when work-life balance was, for example, not in balance anymore and it felt unhealthy. And I think that's the most important take from this paper, is that graduate students are more than 6 times as likely to experience depression and anxiety as compared to the general population. So when you get into the PhD, it's a little bit like, starting to smoke. Like, it is as unhealthy for your mental health to do a PhD. And because of these numbers, starting with the COVID-19 pandemic, really, we founded Scholar Minds. And Scholar Minds is a non-profit initiative created by PhDs for PhDs. And so we are PhDs from Berlin specifically, and we have different universities like among us. For example, me coming from the Humboldt Universität, but we also have the Technische Universität, also clinics like the Charité, and from all of these we have PhD students in this group. And we defined our institution as something where we try to improve the status quo on the individual and the institutional level. And here are just the definitions of what we mean by early career researchers, what we mean on the individual level, so really support people on their individual needs, and also on the institutional level, because we were quite aware that just because we wanted to change something, that's not all. The system as is, the academic system, also has to change in order for sustainable changes and improving mental health. And so we set different goals within the initiative. The first goal being that we wanted to assemble mental health resources on our website. And this we got done, so you can find us on this website where we really provide information on how you can find help in Berlin specifically in terms of psychological support and also institutional support. There's also more information on the mental health crises, personal actions and self-help tools, and also activities that we did. I'm just going to get into some, like Growing Up in Science or the mental health conferences that we did, and seminars and talks that we give in graduate schools to talk about mental health and to provide practical exercises, basically. The second goal was to organize different events on the topic of mental health and PhD. And I already said that we did that in different forms. Throughout the pandemic, we offered online workshops, and we also did online conferences where we tackled different topics like diversity in academia, advances and challenges. And we also worked together with the the Krankenkasse, so the public healthcare, one of the public healthcare operators, to make this topic more aware. And they were actually very grateful for us, or that we were reaching this part of the population, because typically it was very difficult to get to PhD candidates and to support them in their mental health. And then the last thing that was very important for us was to also understand how our PhD candidates here in Berlin and the surrounding areas are doing. So we also did a survey or two to assess this. And I want to show you some data out of this survey, which was published in Scientific Reports. And we here looked at roughly 200 students and PhD candidates, which were questioned with when the COVID-19 pandemic was still on. And we also retrospectively asked them, okay, how was it, or how is it now within the pandemic, and how was it before? So first of all, here we have a slide where we see how many of the PhD candidates were diagnosed with a mental health disorder before the PhD. And can I do this? Oh, I can't. Okay, anyways, the big pie chart that you see on top, you can actually see that it was 15 to 16% from the total sample. But I think what's interesting is that if you already have a mental health disorder, you are, and this is the one on the bottom right for you, you are very much likely to also have another mental health disorder during your PhD, so it enhances the risk. So roughly 50% of these 15 to 16% in the beginning will have another mental disorder throughout the PhD, which is very alarming. That means being a PhD candidate makes you vulnerable for mental health problems. Here I'm presenting you results of two of the surveys that we did from 2020 and 2022. And both of them were asking, do you think that your current mental health problems are related to your PhD training? And what we found is that almost 50% said yes, at least partially, in 2020. And in 2022, it were even 67%. So 2/3 of the PhD candidates says, hey, I think my PhD training might actually influence my mental health. Here on the left side is the question I was talking about before. So how was your satisfaction with the PhD before and in the pandemic? And in light green, you have pre-pandemic, and in darker green, you have being in the pandemic situation. You can also see that satisfaction decreased in the pandemic. And on the right side, you have the question, how did mental well-being change within the pandemic relative to pre-pandemic times? And here you also see that 76% say it has changed for the worse. And one of the last graphs from our paper I want to show you is one where we looked at predictors of what actually predicts more depression, anxiety, and burnout in PhD candidates. And as you can see, there are a lot of variables, but the variable that is predicting or like has like the most influence is the satisfaction with your PhD. So the satisfaction that you have with your PhD training is a very important resilience factor to help you get through maybe mental health problems. And also something related to the PhD training, which should be like a big exclamation mark for all the graduate programs that we have out there, is when we ask the PhD candidates, so how did you, like when you got into the PhD, was the experience as you imagined? Was it worse or was it better? And here actually 62% said that it was worse than they imagined. So that also means that like whatever they got as an impression before, like how a PhD would be like, how a graduate program would be like, was not as the reality. So thinking about this means, okay, how can we actually improve this? How can we meet expectations of what maybe future PhD candidates may have? And so I want to, from these numbers, go to a more practical side, because with these numbers, like I wanted to show you how important it is to talk about mental health in academia, because very few people really want to talk about it. When you look at this amazing conference here, there's actually one little session on mental health, even though every day, like we have to go to work and we have to go through struggles, and I'm pretty sure most of us at one point have struggled with like mental health problems. And so I want to like point out some mindset challenges that will come probably to you when you work in academia. And the first thing I'm taking is the concept of essentialism that you might have heard of. And it's here talking about how tasks in academia are brought to us. And here language is important, which means when you get into, for example, your PhD, you have to do a lot of different things. You have to know a lot of different things. You have to develop a skill set. Like you have to know how to write research papers, you have to know how to do your research, you have to go to conferences, you have to present posters. And at some point, everything seems to be important. And everything seems to be equally important. So you wanna spend your time on all the things, which means at the end, you spend energy on everything, but you're not getting done anything because you have all these different foci, and it's very difficult then to get one thing done. So sometimes in the academic world, you get the idea of okay, you have to do everything at the same time, everything is important. Instead, something that we try to talk about in the workshops that we give to PhD candidates is to say, hey, instead of say, I have to, make it more about I choose to. And is really everything important? Is it really important to go to 10 conferences and to present your work? Or is it more important to maybe go to 1 or 2 that are really important and then focus on these? Or is it important to work on 10 research projects or only on 1 or 2? So this is a choice that we have, we as an individual. But at the same time, we also understand that sometimes that's not possible, because we still have this publish or perish culture in science where you only can get somewhere when you have a lot of papers published. So we know this is something in the mindset we can change for us, but it doesn't change the system. And so here we also have to question whether the system of this publish and perish culture is a system that we still want to follow. Then I also want to present to you some typical core beliefs that are not only relevant here for science, but I guess for throughout our lives. And the first one is something, be perfect. It doesn't matter if you write an email to your supervisor, or you do your research project, or you write your paper, everything has to be perfect, there can be no mistakes in science, so there is no culture of failures. There's only a culture of always getting it right. Then this idea of be strong, so that you always have to be there 100%. Like it cannot be that you have a bad day. Then try even harder. This idea of like, if you didn't try really hard, that means you didn't earn your success. So if you're not in the lab 24/7 working on whatever you work on in the lab, that means you're not working hard enough. That also means you are not a good scientist. I'm just really bringing it to the top here, right? So that you get like the gist of it. And also this idea of that you have to be likable within your like lab environment or within your scientific group, that like you have to be like good with everybody. You can never say no when they ask you to do something. And then the last part would be to hurry up, so that like not only have to do perfect work, you also have to do very fast and efficient work. Because otherwise, like you didn't try hard enough and you're getting like in all these different kind of typical core beliefs. Instead, yet again, on the individual level, we ask like to be nicer on yourself. So if we go through these different statements, we would say that like it's okay to make mistakes. An email can like have some mistakes and it's still fine, it's still only an email. So that you allow yourself 10% of mistakes. And also thinking about when is it necessary to have a good performance versus when is it necessary to have a perfect performance. If you publish a paper and you want to make sure everything is right and correct, then yes, it needs to be maybe a perfect performance. But for emails, maybe a good performance is fine, and that also means you can shift your time and your energy differently. And you are in control of the process. You can say, okay, I choose to make a good performance here, but a perfect performance there. So you don't have to be perfect all the time. We would also say that, of course, like being strong is a good resource. At the same time, having your emotions, meaning that you might be sad or overwhelmed or exhausted at some point in your PhD, is very much okay so, because we are all humans, and you need your emotions, because your emotions actually tell you when it's too much, or when you might need a break. So value and cherish them, and also think about whom can I talk to, if it has to be in my workplace or in my private place, about these emotions, and take them seriously, because they are there for a reason. Also, this like try harder. Yes, of course, when you're new to science and you have to learn a specific skill like programming, or you learn a lot about genes probably and how they are like working and all of this. But if you are already an expert in some fields, enjoy that it doesn't take you so much time, or like that you can, some people can write a research paper in an hour, some people need 3 days. Enjoy the fact that you can do that. Not everything in your work has to be hard in order for you to be successful with it. And when it comes to, making everybody happy, the first thing is that you make yourself happy, and that you don't have others take advantage of you. In the first place, it should always be say yes to yourself and say no to others. And especially within this PhD journey, at some point you hurry up, but the reality is a PhD takes us up to 3 to 6 years. So if you always run on the fastest speed, you might not get to the end. So seeing this PhD as a marathon, and to really think about, okay, when do I need to run fast? When do I need to run a little bit slower? Makes a lot of sense in terms of using your resources right. So that you take time to think, and you also plan buffers for yourself. What we also talk about is having a fixed versus a growth mindset. And A fixed mindset basically is that you get into the PhD and you avoid any kind of challenge because you're afraid to make mistakes, you don't want to listen to feedback, you think that however hard you work, that your effort is actually fruitless and that you give up very easily. Instead, what is helpful in the PhD, but also in other parts of our lives, is to come into a growth mindset. And what that means is that, we don't have a culture of failure in science, but what if we could? So if we go to talks and we make mistakes and we can enjoy to accept the criticism that we get and get our desire to learn going. And this is what is meant with this growth mindset, that we embrace challenges and we face failures as they come, and then we can learn from them and really, get out of this fixed mindset. And in some parts of our lives, we already might be in a growth mindset. For example, when it comes to sports. No one is questioning that you have to go 2 to 3 times a week, maybe to the gym to get fit, that there will be challenges, and that sometimes you might not do exercises correctly, and so you have to do them again and learn them. But when it comes to our mind, we are way more crude to ourselves. It also takes practice to get from this fixed to a growth mindset. And here is some kind of self-check, just for yourself. You don't have to answer but it's for thinking about it. When you make a mistake in your academic work, how do you talk to yourself? And the next time this happens, and you think, okay, I didn't really talk nicely to myself when this mistake happened, maybe you can think about, how could I rephrase it in a way that still shows I made a mistake, but it's in a very respectful way to myself as well. Because in reality, if this mistake would happen to a friend, we would talk to them very differently in comparison to ourselves. So how could we say it in a way we would also say it to a friend? And here I also brought a couple of steps how to get to a growth mindset. And the first thing is the thing I already started with when I showed you this exercise, is tell yourself a different story. The next step is, instead of setting performance goals and say, okay, I was successful when I published a paper, make it learning goals, which means that on the way of getting your first paper published or your second paper, what are you learning? Are you learning to become better in scientific writing? Are you trying out a new method? Making these your learning goals. So in the end, yes, you have your paper published, but what's more important is what you learned on the way. So it's not about the end, it's about the way you're going and you're experiencing. Yeah, one thing I already said is that you capitalize on your failures and you really take them and say, yes, I failed today, I made a mistake, and now I'm using this for my next step to make it better or make it different. One thing is also to choose Goldilocks tasks. I don't know how many of you know Goldilocks. It's a character from a book. I think it's the 3 Bears. And in the 3 Bears, there is a little girl, and the little girl wants some porridge. And there are 3 bears, and they offer her different kind of porridges. One is very hot, one is very cold, and one has exactly the right temperature. So it's not too warm and not too cold. And this is what a Goldilocks task is. So it's a task that is challenging you, but it's not too challenging. So for example, when you start programming or when you start on a new gene project, that you're not going with the most advanced methods at the beginning, but you really start with basics and then you move forwards. This can also help you in the shift to a growth mindset. And the last point being consistent and flexible, which just means that on the one hand, you are consistently thinking about, okay, how did I talk to myself today? Was I in a growth or fixed mindset state? This meaning being consistent, and flexible meaning, okay, how can I change it the next time? And I'm going to come to my last point when it comes to mindset challenges. And I'm pretty sure most of you had already the thoughts that I am presenting you. Even when I do well, I don't think I really deserve it. I downplay my achievements. Or I believe that the success I've had is a fluke. So even though I'm here and I'm doing a PhD at the moment, this has nothing to do with me. That was just pure luck. I did like a bachelor's, a master's to get here. That wasn't me. No, I was just lucky. So you're in good company if you had these thoughts before. Actually, 70% experience, we named them kind of imposter feelings at some point in life. And especially in science, imposter feelings are a big thing. I brought some studies here, or like it is from a systematic review, where they looked at who is vulnerable to imposter feelings. And on the left side, you have like one thing on gender differences, where they couldn't really find a gender effect. So sometimes it is referred to that women show higher rates of imposter syndrome, but here this was actually not the case. Then there was also on the top right part, when looking at age, that imposter feelings actually decline over time, so that with age and maybe more experience, your imposter feelings decrease. And I think the most important point, which is in the bottom part, is that imposter syndrome or imposter feelings is very prevalent among ethnic minorities. And that imposter syndrome is actually a stronger predictor of mental health issues than minority status stress. And thinking about this, why could this be? Because if we look into science, we often and still have very prototypical scientists. So scientists who are men, scientists who are white, and so it's very difficult for minorities to find their role models. And if they see, okay, there's actually no one like me in there, how should I fit in there? Then it makes sense that there's more imposter feelings within these minority groups. Here's just a quick zoom in on academia. And it's actually interesting here that they checked like the brilliance in the field. So especially in when the field was perceived to require more brilliance, then especially women from racial ethnic groups showed higher imposter feelings. And this is where you come into picture again, early career academics as well. And I already talked about this, right? That there's like, that because there's a mainstream group, you don't feel like you belong in this group. And you also might feel that like you experience some kind of discrimination. And here I also just want to give you some steps into how to get through imposter feelings, because these feelings, they probably never go away. They are part of like, there's one part of you which has imposter feelings, and it's just important to acknowledge them and then to think about how to deal with them over time. And the first step would be to recognize them. By the way, if you are interested in having like a detailed workshop on that, we also have a detailed workshop on imposter. So the first step would be to recognize it. If you want to learn more about your imposter feelings, we have like a little questionnaire here that's on the internet. It's like imposter syndrome also is not like a diagnosis, right? So it's really just about like some questions where you can just check, but it will also be on the slides afterwards. So the first one would be to recognize it. The second one would be to be rational about it. So to really think about, okay, I'm standing here, I have to give a talk, and now I'm thinking about, oh, can I do this? Oh, will I be able to do it? And then be rational about it and say, okay, I have done this many times before, this is my topic, I've talked about it, I have researched it, so I can be confident about it. So this would be making it rational. Then reframe the situation for yourself, now that I'm standing here, taking all these like rational thoughts and using them in the situation. Next step would be to always have this ready when you are coming into the situation, to use it again. And I already said that, to repeat these steps. Because when you will give your next talk or lecture, these feelings might come up again. So I'm just going to quickly summarize what I want to, when you go out here, what like 3 things you maybe can take with you. So the current research environment presents a challenge for the mental health of many scientists. I showed you different surveys that really underlie that this is not over. Like, there is still a mental health crisis and we have to work on it from different angles. Within our PhD journey, our mind is the most crucial companion that we have. And using this mind and making it flexible and thinking about, okay, how can I make this so that I'm comfortable with it, is very important. Throughout this PhD journey, there will be imposter feelings at some point, and it's important to acknowledge them, to rationalize, and to think about what can I hold against these feelings. There's one last thing I want to mention, which is, when is it time to get help? So when you realize that everything you do when it comes to your personal life, your work and university, and your relationships, when you realize in all of these areas it is too much, like you are more and more going away from things you liked before, you are not going out as much anymore, you're not meeting your friends anymore, you are only focused on work maybe, and that over a longer period of time. So we are not talking about a week or so, but we're talking about month and month. Then this needs to be taken very seriously. And if you are in this spot, then try to find help. And these signs can be like found in your thoughts. So if you have constant thoughts of, I'm not good enough, I have to bring everything into my work, in your mood and feelings, if you feel constantly sad or anxious, in your actions, that you're not taking part in like the life you had anymore before, or your body symptoms, that you feel constantly tired, headaches, and so forth, then it's time to get help. And if you need to find help, I recommend you, for example, to go on our website, for Berlin specifically, but also more general, we have resources on how you can find help. With that being said, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Are there questions or comments in the audience? So we have quite some time for discussion, so please step forward and share your thoughts with us.
Hello, thank you so much for an amazing presentation. You briefly touched upon this topic, but I want to bring this up again. As from a starting PhD student to a more senior scientist, and to all of the more senior scientists in this room, what and how should we do to change the system, of the academic system that requires so much stress? Because without those changes, all of this has a strong victim blaming vibe. Like, you decided to do this, well, cope with it. And this is the list of things. I do not think that this is the way it should be, but the problem of the system in which scientists, academics work is global, and I would like to hear some opinions on this topic, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that's like the most difficult part for us as well. Like, our first attempt was to create attention for the problem. And so within the conferences, we also had principal investigators there to make aware of this problem. And what we also are planning to do is a survey with principal investigators to learn and understand what they might need to support the PhD candidates, because quite often supervision is a very important part of the PhD satisfaction. And so this is one step toward understanding them and then bringing it together to understand like how they like can improve it. I think another big thing that was financial instability, where especially here in Germany, there is a lot of changes going on in, at least I can only talk for like psychology and neuroscience, that there are more and more paid positions. But you are right, so far, we are still like in the really beginning of like making changes in the system.
If I may add, I represent the European Society of Human Genetics Young, and if you have like, I don't know, initiatives or ideas, you could also contact us. Maybe we can make something.
Yeah, if I may add something, you already saw when Sandra asked who in the audience is a PhD students, most of you are, and there is an interesting lack of PIs. I mean, I see PIs here and PIs who are interested, but the senior scientists are broadly missing in this session. So I think the main point, I'm part of the Junge Humangenetik, and this is a session initiated by the ESHG Young and the Junge Humangenetik from Germany. And yeah, our point is to raise awareness. And I think you were very right in saying, don't fix the people, fix the system. And this is just a start. We need to get the PIs on board and the senior scientists. Does anyone else has comments or discussion points to make? Because we still have plenty of time.
My name's Anita. I am a PhD student in Melbourne, Australia, and first I just really wanted to thank you for an amazing talk and for some really practical considerations about how I definitely acknowledge the systemic issues, but I think, you know, as a PhD student who's working within that system, I think that it's really lovely to kind of have specific examples of how we can kind of use self-talk to help with our own experience. I also just wanted to ask a question, which was whether you've thought or done much work on how neurodivergence interacts with things like anxiety and depression and mental well-being during graduate research or early career research.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's a very good question. No, we haven't yet, actually. And like when you say neurodivergent, which populations are you specifically referring to?
I mean, I guess it could be any neurodivergence, but I'm specifically thinking about autism, ADHD, even like dyslexia, dyspraxia, etc., and how that might kind of interact with mental well-being and whether it is a predictor, for example, as well.
We didn't do any research on it. What I could imagine that it is, when it comes to, I was like at the top of my head also thinking about imposter feelings and the slide that I presented on like racial minorities, that it might go in the same direction, that like you typically see senior scientists and none of them really claim that they are neurodivergent or that they have some kind of mental health problem. What we actually did to try to destigmatize this is to also do this series called Growing Up in Science, where we invited PIs and asked them to present their real CV. Because like when you see their CVs on the internet, you're like, oh my God, like this person in like 2 years, they become a professor, how did that even go? And like in the series, we specifically asked them to share like their problems, their issues, like their big stones on the way that they had to put away to to normalize that it's normal within the PhD that there will be problems and issues. But I was thinking back at this, and there was actually no one like claiming things, and it would be very interesting, actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there further questions or comments to this? In general, if not, my suggestion would be, since this is recorded, show this to your PIs. You all have a login to the database. All the sessions from the conference will be available online. And if your PI wasn't here, show them or tell your peers and watch it together so they learn about the problem. I think the numbers Sandra showed in the beginning were really maybe not astounding because many of us would have guessed it, but raise awareness. That's the first step into the right direction. Are there further questions or any comments from your side?
I think maybe I can add something too. I mean, we are a self-founded initiative, and we always support like other. We were in the beginning, I think, 5 PhDs. And if you feel like, okay, like there is nothing like this in my university, and I maybe also want to open up this kind of initiative, we are also always happy to like talk to you and support you if you need help in setting up something like this. And this can range from, like in the beginning, we also had peer-to-peer support, where you just met with other PhDs once a week and just talk about like 5 minutes, okay, how are you, how are you, how are you? And this already made all the difference because you knew that there are other people who were having either a good time or a bad time. So if like you need inspiration on how to do that, or like we are always happy to help you on that.
Maybe I have one last comment to that. When you founded the Scholar Minds, what were the challenges you faced, or how did you proceed? I mean, you met as a group of PhD students and decided we need to do something. How did you approach the senior scientists? How did you get supports? Because if you Google Scholar Minds, you have a big website. I think you even organized a conference, right? And you did a lot. How did you get started?
So, as I said, we started with like 5 people, and as you also said, we have a website which doesn't come from nothing. And so, in the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were also asked whether we could give talks and workshops, and we said, yes, we can do that, but we also want to have some kind of like that our expenses are also met. And so, like with the workshops, we earned as much money as to finance these things, and like to also like use it in like the conferences and stuff. And so this is how we grew. And then we asked our like PIs that we had, like my PI and other PIs, if they can support us, and it grew from there. And like once we offered the workshop once, other graduate schools were interested. So there is a really big need, and up until today, we have so many graduate schools that ask us. We are not able to provide like workshops for everybody. And what is really challenging now is actually, now that we are all kind of graduated, it's really difficult to find new members. Because once you are graduated, like you are in a different position again, and you are facing different new challenges. That's why we're always looking for new members, actually.
Yes, please.
So my name is Sven Bergman from the University of Lausanne. I probably am a senior PI. First of all, I want to thank you very much. I think this was very useful and really wonderful session. One of the thoughts I had is that most universities have doctoral schools, and I wonder if one could systematically reach out to them, and because they usually have direct access both to their students. We have like 500 PhD students in the University of Lausanne, and also to supervisors who, I very much agree, often just don't have the awareness nor even any good material to inform themselves. So that might be a potential point. And the other thought I had is that probably 6 PIs who stayed in the system have a selection bias. I would reckon that they didn't have such a bad experience, simply otherwise they might have not have stayed in the system. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I think we have to become aware of. And, you know, it's like, you know, just because we were lucky, maybe, not to have the worst time, that doesn't mean that others are really not having the same experience. And again, that's something maybe through doctoral schools or other channels you might want to point out to PIs in general, that their experience is not representative of the experience of most of PhD students.
Mm. Yeah, I guess that's a really good point. I have one note on that. I think it's one, like what you said, that like maybe they were lucky or it was like a good time for this kind of research and that's why they got into a PI position. I also heard like from some PIs that they said to their PhD candidates, look, I had to suffer in my PhD, so you have to suffer as well. And this should not be the mindset, because it doesn't have to be like this. It doesn't be a road of suffering to become a professor or a PI. But yet again, this is what like we referred earlier to, that needs systemic changes. And thank you for like pointing out that we should also like reach out to like more international graduate schools to get like even more impact.
Yeah, thank you everyone for the lively discussion. We're proceeding.
Thank you very much. Next, I'm gonna... Let me introduce Dr. Daniel Carrieri. He's a senior lecturer